Welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and I'm really excited today to be checking out a game that's currently on Kickstarter as of this recording. So when this video lands, you'll be able to go check out this game in action on Kickstarter, and it's called Die in the Dungeon. And as you can see, it's coming from Fundamental Games, noted right up here in the top left-hand corner. I've got a prototype here with me, and I'm hoping this is going to help you make an informed decision on whether or not you want to pick up Die in the Dungeon. So without further ado, we're going to go over an overview, which is going to include setting up the game, talking about some of the major mechanics within the game, and then going through a round or so of play to get an idea of how this thing works. So without further ado, let's start with a quick overview of the setup. It's also worth noting that everything you're going to see in this video is in prototype form and is subject to change. The very first step of setup is to choose the creature you want to play as, and then take that creature board and place it in front of you. We'll talk more about that in a second, because what's also important is understanding why we're here. What are we doing, and why are we choosing a creature instead of a hero? That's actually quite different. So in this game, you're a powerful creature, very used to being in control, with others in constant fear of you. Without warning, you were taken away from your lands by a spell cast by someone known only as the Die-Master, a mighty wizard that even you could not stop. And now you find yourself in an unknown dungeon full of weaker monsters and annoying adventurers. The Die-Master has said you will only be released if you eradicate the many heroes that have infiltrated the dungeon. You must destroy those who are seeking treasure and fame at the Die-Master's expense. Alright, so let's go ahead and choose our creature we want to control. And the other thing to note about this decision that's important is the fact that each of these creatures have abilities listed on their boards. You'll want to read through them to figure out what style you're going after or what abilities you like the most in choosing your creature. The other thing to note is it's not just what's printed on the boards themselves in terms of the two abilities listed here, as well as the ability icon plus the costs that it's going to take in order to do that ability, which then again relates back to a stat. You've got 6 stats along the bottom here, so the ability stat right here is going to be referenced by a D4. We'll talk more about how all those are set later on, but it's important to note the correlation between the ability and the ability stat. The other thing to mention is whichever creature we happen to choose also comes with its own unique set of 4 more abilities, which are represented in cards. So if I was to choose Trollbones, as I plan to, then I'm going to get these 4 ability cards to use. I've got my creature board on the table as well as my 4 ability cards. You'll see here in terms of Trollbones, he's got Lucky Die, where he can spend 1 on his ability. It says use this ability when you would make an agility or magic check. We'll talk more about those stats later on. You automatically succeed the check. That's pretty awesome. It's got a nice little flavor text there at the bottom as well. We also have Defensive Maneuvers over here for 2. And then below here we have Defensive Skin, and in the bottom right we have Regenerate. Something else worth grabbing for reference is the reference card, and you'll want one of those handy as it's going to go through the turn sequence. Of course, we'll talk about this later in the game flow. And then flipping over to the opposite side, combat sequence. Again, we'll talk about this later on. The next step is to take a full set of dice, a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, and D20. Set the D4 to a 1 and place it below the ability icon on your stat bar. Then set the D20 to 20 and place it below the time icon on your stat bar. Next, take the remaining 4 dice and set them to their max values, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Then place them as you wish beneath each of the other 4 stat icons. We have Might on the left, Agility, magic, and then health. All the dice are now in place. So a unique aspect for Die in the Dungeon on character creation, or creature creation in this case, is the fact that you can have those 4 dice in the middle situated however you please. I currently have my health set to 10, I have my magic at 6, I have my agility at 12, and I have my might at 8, but I could have rearranged this in any way I wanted. Next, go ahead and grab the other 2 sets of dice, and they're to be used for rolling results throughout the game and for upgrading dice on your creature board as you play through the dungeon. The next major step is to set up your dungeon. In a moment here, we'll deal with all the different hero types and the epic heroes as well, but first let's set the dungeon up. We have to go ahead and organize our dungeon tiles into each type here. So we have at the very top a number of start tiles as well as some blank tiles on the far right hand side. You'll see there's 2 of them here in the prototype copy, but they're literally blank on both sides. Over here we have a dead end tile, there's 10 of those. Then corner tiles, there's 10 of those. 2-way tiles, there's 10 of those. 3-way, there's 8 of them. 4-way, there's 8 of them, and then the epic party tiles, 1, 2, 3, 4. Next, you'll want to find the dungeon guide and go through it to choose which one of these dungeons you're going to take on. In my case here, for this example, I'm going to go ahead and set up the early buffs dungeon, and it has some information that's really important specified right here in the bottom section for dungeon notes. It says only use level 1 2-way tiles, use level 1 and level 2 epic party tiles, so that tells us that the 3 and 4 need to be removed, and we have to defeat the epic heroes in order to win. It also mentions things like the tokens required. It also mentions the tiles required and how many of them. So again, now that your stacks are set up, you can simply draw from them and begin building out the dungeon as indicated on the page. So as I'm setting up for the early buffs scenario, I'm only supposed to be using level 1 2-way tiles. So this 2-way tile set right here has had 2 tiles removed from it. These ones right here that state level 2 on them. All the level 1s or blank ones are still inside of that deck. Also, it states to use only level 1 or level 2 epic tiles. So as you can see, 1 and 2 are here. I've removed 3 and 4, and we already know what our objective is for this one. It's defeat the epic heroes. So now I'm going to go ahead and start randomly placing all of these out in a grid pattern to create early buffs. Now we have the early buffs dungeon set up, and one thing to note from the prior clip is you might have noticed that the start tile that was in that clip had a 4-way path behind it. So there is a 1-way path, 2-way path, 3-way path, and 4-way path because there's 4 different start tiles. I showed the 4-way path in the prior clip, but as you can see right here for this particular dungeon, it's the 1-way path out that I'm going to be using. So with that, everything is correctly placed, and now we're going to go ahead and place the tokens inside the dungeon. The first tokens I'm going to place inside the dungeon represent where the epic party tiles are, and these again are denoted inside the dungeon guide. So I've placed a token to represent each of them. We know one of them is a level 1 and the other is level 2. Next, I've placed 6 Dominion tokens as noted by Early Buffs dungeon scenario. You'll notice the placement of all of them and the fact there's different representations of different dies here. We have a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, and D20. These Dominions are your little sidekicks, and they're ready to be tossed at heroes and dungeon traps alike to increase your odds of victory. The final tokens to be placed on the dungeon are these ones in the bottom left-hand corner, and they all relate back to stats. So you can see we have magic, might, agility, health, time, and ability. The last thing that's needed to be placed on the table is your creature. It's represented by one of these standees, which is extremely nice. You can see that it's printed on both sides, it's clear straight through. I really like the build of these. They're quite nice. You can actually see that it takes quite a bit just to pull them apart, but they're also really easy to put back together. Just simply slide them in, they click in place, but they look really, really good. So either way, your creature is now ready to go, and we'll place it on the starting tile. Next up in the box, you're going to find 6 mini D6s, and we're going to go ahead and place these right next to this track right here. All the mini D6s are now in place. They're all set to 1, and I've placed them on the left-hand side of the track. Think of this track as your victory point track, and what's important to note about this is it's going to actually be keeping track of how many victory points you have, but there's another mechanic with this, and there's a piece of it that is worth mentioning in terms of this prototype that is missing. So on the right-hand side of each of these victory point levels, there will be an indication of what you should set your die to once you get it. So how do you get a die into one of these slots? Well, essentially, let's say hypothetically hypothetically I went ahead as the Troll of Bones and I took out an individual and I got 1 victory point. So I would take this die here and I'll put it on the right hand side to indicate that I have 1 victory point. As I take out more and more individuals, let's say next time I take out a total of 3, now I'm up to 4. Eventually I'm going to get to 6, and when I do get to 6, then I get to actually turn this die to a 1 and slot it in here, and I can use it in what's called a dynamic die to actually add 2 additional rolls later on. Pretty cool. Now what's going to happen is as you get to the different levels all the way up, the die that gets slotted in for use is going to get higher and higher. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Another correction to the prototype that will happen in the final version is that this value right here for 28 will actually become a 30, so that they're all increments of 6 up this victory point track. Finally, as a creature, I begin the game with a die minion at my disposal, a token, which I'll just place on my character board. And that wraps up the setup for Die in the Dungeon. Now let's talk about the stats in a little bit more depth, at least in terms of what they represent and what they're for. So first off, we have time, and as we noted earlier in the setup, it's always set to 20 when you start the game. At least once per turn, you're going to lose 1 time, but there will be effects that can restore time, and if you lose your last time point, you lose the game at the end of that turn. The next stat is Might, and it represents your strength and combat skills and defense against fighters. Agility is the next stat, and it represents your stealth and speed skills and defense against rogues. The next stat is Magic, and this represents your innate magic skills and defense against warriors. Your health is the next stat, and that one's pretty self-explanatory. It's your life force. If you lose your last health point, of course, you immediately lose the game. And finally, the ability stat, points used to activate any ability cards or effects you have, as we talked about earlier in the video, and this die cannot be upgraded. We'll talk about upgrades later on. The next major focus inside of Die in the Dungeon is, of course, the dice. The fact you're going to be rolling dice is one of the major aspects of Die in the Dungeon, and usually you would think that that involves just pure luck. So in other words, there's no chance that you can strategize or mitigate the dice rolls, but in Die in the Dungeon, there is a lot of mitigation options for you. We're going to talk about a number of those as we go along. It's important to note that 3 of the stats which are on your creature board, Might, Agility, and Magic, are primarily going to be used during battles. The first thing is that they each represent what die type you'll roll when you make an attack of that stat. So if I decide to attack with Might, I'll be grabbing a D8 and using it. Not the D8 that's actually sitting here on the character board, but one of the D8s from the other sets that I have available around the board. The value of the stat is your defense against the hero's attack. The heroes must roll a value higher than your current stat value for that attack type. So the higher the stat is, the more likely you are to dodge that kind of stat attack. Now let's say hypothetically for this example that my agility stat was actually a 7 instead of the 12 it actually was when I set up. And a hero went ahead and attacked my agility and landed a 9. So this is a successful hit. And because it's over the amount that I have in that stat, which is at 7, it's a 2 difference, I can choose now how I want to actually take that hit. I can take it on the actual stat die alone. In other words, I could actually tick my 7 down to a 5. However, this is obviously going to leave me more vulnerable to attacks of that particular stat in the future. Or instead of actually flipping this one down to a 5, if I can find the 7 side here at some point, where is it hiding on me? There it is. And I wanted to actually go ahead and tick down my health, I could do that as well. Take it from a 10 down to an 8. Or if I wanted to, instead, I could share between the two. I could actually take this to a 9 for my health and drop this one down to a 6. Another way that you can manipulate the stat dice values is if you're happening to going up against another hero and you're in battle and you're deciding to attack against a particular stat. As you can see, we have the rogue here, and this rogue, level 1, has 2 for might, a 4 for agility, or 1 for magic. Now I can decide which of these stats I want to use to go up against this particular rogue in an attack. So if I decided I wanted to use my D12, I wouldn't actually roll the die sitting in my stat area. I'd roll another D12 from one of the other sets of dice I put put beside my creature board. If I rolled it and landed a 3, as it shows here, that is less than the agility that I need to land this. It's actually 2 less because you need to be above that value. You cannot be tied with it. So I need to get this number from 3 up to 5. So how can I manipulate the die to make this happen? Well, I can simply reduce this 12 down to a 10, and I can then uptick this to a 5, which then makes my attack successful. When it comes to might, agility, and magic, you can never reduce the die to less than 1. Now let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about the hero cards themselves. We got 4 regular heroes here, and again, they level up. There's multiple levels of these different types of heroes. We have the fighter, rogue, wizard, and cleric. So here's an example of the fighter. Here is an example of the rogue, as we saw just moments ago. We have the wizard as well. And finally, the cleric. So inside the dungeon, you're going to find daring adventurers seeking fame and wealth, or just driven by some need to do what they call good. And as in this case, being a troll of bones, I'm going to be moving throughout the dungeon trying to find these heroes and take them out. And we're talking about the regular heroes right now, not the epic party later on. So on my turn, and this will be talked about more when we go through the full turn sequence, but as an example of seeing the different types of heroes in the dungeon, at least at the regular ones, we can go ahead on our turn and lose a single point of time, which we would tick our green D20 down from 20 to 19, and we would move Troll of Bones from this location here to here. Now, of course, if I was actually here during gameplay, these would be flipped over, but we're going to go ahead and do this example right now so you guys can see it. So we'll flip this tile over, and you'll notice at the very bottom of the tile, it's going to let you know exactly what heroes are showing up. So based on the tile level, which is a 1, we know we'll be finding 1 warrior there. So I've gone ahead and placed a warrior. We also know we'll be finding a cleric there as well. And again, level 1. So you guys are now fully aware that this icon up here is for the level, and we've also got their base stats down below. But what you don't know yet is the fact that these 2 stats, being that they're the same, of course, these are might, combine when they come together as a party or group. So what we have here is a total of 6 might combined, and this is going to actually tie into what die you end up getting to use when you go into combat with these individuals. We'll talk more about a combat example later on, but always think of a group of heroes together as adding all of their similar stats together. So it's not just might, it would also be the adding together of agility. This would be a total of 4, and magic value would be at a total of 3. Another thing to note on these particular hero cards that's very important is it denotes what type of attack stat is being used for that particular hero when they do make an attack. And again, that attack will be as a party or grouped together with all the numbers added up. So in this case, the warrior will be making an attack here using might, but you'll see here with the cleric, there's nothing here that's circled the same way as the might circle is on this fighter over here. So the cleric actually doesn't make an attack on its own. It's more of a buff character to the die total. The other thing to note is that the rogue here is focused on agility attacks, so it would trigger an agility attack if it was part of the party that got pulled from the tile. And the wizard is, of course, going to be using magic. So we've talked about the fighter, rogue, wizard, and cleric. We know that each of them use different things to attack you with, whether it's might, agility, magic, or they just protect like the cleric does. But they also, beyond just the die rolling, they have the ability to use abilities themselves against you. And you'll see down here underneath fighter, because the fighter uses might, they get a might bonus. If the heroes roll a 10 or higher on a might roll while a fighter is in the party, they deal an additional might damage. That's not good. And you'll see there's differences for each of these types of enemies or heroes you can run into. So now that we have a better understanding of the hero cards, as well as the abilities that they have when they're grouped up in a party and the things they can throw at you, which don't sound too nice, this right here is the next thing I want to focus on. That is what comes up on these dungeon tiles. Now, we talked about the fact that you're going to have a title, you're going to have a level, and you're going to have a denotion of what heroes are going to show up on that particular tile. But I didn't talk about the tile effect. So you see here it says each hero must be defeated twice this battle. So when battling, that fighter, and that cleric, they're each going to have to be taken out 2 times before they're actually removed. You may also run into tiles that have you do a stat check that's specific to one of the stats you have. So in this case, make a might check. If the result's less than an 8, you lose 2 health. So you'll be trying your best to avoid a collapse from hurting you. All right, let's move on to die minions. These are your minions. You want to find these things in the dungeon because they're going to help you out. Almost everything token-wise on the dungeon are things that are going to help you, minus the die in the dungeon tokens, which are specific to finding the epic party that you're going to have to take down. They are important because you need to build up to get there to fight them and take them out. However, they're not going to beef you up. They're going to push you into a confrontation. So the other tokens around the game board are much more important, and hence the reason this is called early buffs. We've got a whole bunch of early buffs as you go along here, and we'll talk about how those work in a second, but the die minions are all of these die tokens we put out earlier. There's 6 of them for 6 different type of dice, plus we started with a D6 die minion on our character board. Doesn't matter which side you show. One's got a cute side with some warrior outfit on a die, but the one that's important is the front side, mainly because of the die it can be used with. So this is a D6 and can only be used in conjunction with a D6. So here's an example of how a die minion is actually used. So let's say hypothetically we found ourselves this tile right here collapsed. Now I notice, and you guys probably do as well, it's not connected properly. It's actually pointing off into the abyss. So that's incorrect, but I'm just doing this for the simple tile effect here, which is make a might check. If the result is less than 8, you lose 2 health. That's what I'm focusing on here, mainly because I'm going to use a die minion to my advantage to change my die roll, and I'm going to show you how that works. Also to note, if I was actually here and if this was actually correctly set in terms of the pathway, this would all be explored as well. So just ignore the fact that I haven't flipped any of those tiles over, but pretend we've made it this far. The other thing I'm going to do is give myself a D8 die minion as if I've already found it, which I did not. So let's go into this might check. The reason I gave myself a D8 is because my might check is going to be a D8, and the only time I can use a die minion to help me out is if the actual die minion die type matches the die that I'm using for the stat check. So I would roll a die for this might check, and it states if the result is less than 8, you lose 2 health. That's not good. So let's go ahead and roll this and hope that that doesn't happen. Oh my gosh, I got an 8. Well, I rolled too well. If I had have got a 1, let's say, and I wasn't super lucky while I was filming this, then what would actually happen is I have a couple things I could do here. I could also manipulate my stat, as I talked about before, by knocking this way, way, way down and upping this roll. So I could be crazy and knock this all the way down to 1, but that would make every might check going forward, well, that's just not good for me. But this would tick it up to an 8. Or I could do something like this, and I could say, forget that. That is a terrible idea. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and use my D8 die minion and flip it over. You'll see it's cute on the other side. He's all geared up for war with his swords. And we're going to go ahead and roll another matching die of the same type, and we get to add it to that roll because he's helping us out. Oh, we got a 6, so we were super close. Now, if I was okay with taking the damage, I would take the damage, my total 7. I needed an 8. I just take 2 health hits on my health die from a 10 down to an 8. But I don't want to, so I would go ahead here if I wanted to and just tick this down to a 7, and I've made it. The collapse missed me. As I mentioned earlier on, the die minion is then discarded. You don't get to keep it. It's used up. Now let's talk about the rest of the tokens that are on the board here. They're stat upgrade tokens, time tokens, and ability tokens. So what's really great about these, and again, this is called the early buffs scenario in the dungeon, so for sure this is going to be giving you some nice buffs at the beginning, giving you a leg up on the situation. And you can see here, if I go ahead at the beginning of my turn and spend 1 time, knocking my 20 die down to a 19, I can then move into the next tile, and before I flip the tile over, I take the token that is here. This one relates back to magic, and what this is going to do, allow me to upgrade my magic die. Now, the interesting thing to note when you acquire these tokens is you don't have to use them right away. You can wait to use them, but if you're really wanting to buff up your dice or upgrade your dice, then you can use them immediately as well. And if you do, it's going to give you a +2 on the stat it's related to. So you can see here, a +2 is going to push me from a D6 automatically up to the next die level, because I can't go any higher than a 6 if I'm pushing myself up by 2, so I have to go to a higher die. Just like that, my D6 is now turned into a D8 and has been upgraded. Now, in order to correctly reset myself to where I would have been at the beginning of the game, I would have had this at a D8. It doesn't impact what we're talking about here, but what does actually matter is the number of the same type of dice in your stat row. In other words, you can only ever have have 2 of the same dice type. So right now, because this magic area went from a D6 to a D8, I now have 2 D8s in my stat line, and I can never have more than 2 of the same type of die. I also want to mention another way that you can actually use these stat upgrade tokens when you are actually in a situation like I am right now, based on this example where we have 2 D8s. Let's say hypothetically this wasn't a D12. Let's say it was a D6 and it was sitting at a value of 5. And for some crazy reason, you want to actually tick that up. Now remember, we're at a D6, so we have 2 D8s. We can't upgrade this particular die to the D8 level. So let's say hypothetically I went ahead and found one of these agility upgrade tokens and I want to use it right now. I'm desperate to use it. Well, if I go ahead and spend it, I can still spend this. I can actually tick this die up to the level of 6, but I do not get the ability to bump it up to a D8. So similar to the might stat, agility stat, and the magic stat, if I happen to find a health stat upgrade, I can go ahead and spend this when I want to, and similar to the other 3 I just mentioned, I can go ahead and uptick or upgrade my die because I'm currently at 10, so this would actually put me from a D10 up to a D12 at a value of 12. The time upgrade token and the ability upgrade token both provide a +2. However, the only difference with these ones is there will be no change to the die whatsoever. These dies are stuck at the types they are from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. All right, it's now time to go through a full gameplay turn sequence. We're going to start it off by gaining a single ability point. So the D4 that's sitting in my ability slot is going to uptick from 1 to 2. So that ability die change to a 2 now gives me the availability to spend that in the future to use something like rolling doubles. You may roll 2 dice. For all dice you roll this turn, choose the die you would like as your result. That sounds pretty awesome. Or I can go over to my actual character abilities over here and use the one that only costs 1 called Lucky Die or Defensive Maneuvers. Next up in the turn is the optional rest, and I can lose up to 3 time to gain the same amount of health, and that's pretty straightforward. If you're hurting for health and you want to gain some health back, you can burn some time, but remember, time is vital, and you only have so much of it before you can take down that epic party, so you got to be careful not to rest too often or you won't have much time left to complete your objectives. Next, we're going to go ahead and lose a single point of time. So my 20 is going to tick all the way down to 19, which is really not all the way down. And then we're going to go ahead and move Trollabones along the path here to this first tile. And as I talked about before, I gain this token. I can choose to use it right away to upgrade my die, or I could just hold on to it for now. I'm probably going to go ahead and upgrade my die. Sounds like a pretty good idea. So I'll spend my magic token now in order to upgrade my magic die from a D6 up to a D8. Sounds pretty good to me. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to flip over the dungeon tile and complete the text on it. So let's find out what we have found in this first position here. Poison, that does not sound good to start things out. And it's a level 1. It says make a health check. If the result is less than 6, you lose 2 health. All right, so here's hoping I don't roll less than a 6. So that will result in some damage from the poison. 13. All right, we're A-okay there. So we passed this particular check, and you can see here that it all had to do with health, and we're fine. So we can move on to the next piece. Next on the turn sequence, it says if the tile has a token, gain it. Well, we already gained the token before we flipped the tile, and that is the correct way to do it. As stated in the rulebook, there will be a change or modification to this turn sequence in terms of order in the final version. Next up, it says if the tile has an action to take, this is done prior to combat. So you go ahead and do that prior to combat. There's no combat with this one, so no worries there. And then it says if the tile has hero icons, battle the heroes, move onto the tile once you have defeated the heroes. So a new turn begins now. We gain an ability point, so this is going to go from a 2 up to a 3, giving us more options to use. We still can't use the loaded dice yet, but now we have availability to use this one, Defensive Skin. At this point, I have no reason to rest, so we'll move right to losing some time so we can move along and see what's next. So down to 18, we'll go ahead and move to the next position. You'll see that I got myself a Might upgrade token. So do I want to use this right now? I honestly can't see why not. Let's go ahead and bump it up from a D8 to a D10. So that's pretty awesome. Go ahead and remove that, put a 10 here, and we now have, as you can see, 2 D10s. So we can't have any more of those on the stat line. And look what we found here. Next up is a battle magic tile. This one states to level 2. It says add the hero's might stat to their magic stat when they attack. And it's battle magic. It makes sense. It's a fighter and a wizard. And the other thing to note is I did correct the orientation of the tile so that the dungeon trek actually lines up, as it was a little skewed earlier on. But now we're going to go ahead and grab cards for both of these and ensure they're level 2. All right, a level 2 fighter and a level 2 wizard are no match for Troll of Bones. He's going to handle these guys no problem. And the first thing in combat that I can do, if I want to, is I can choose to use an ability from my creature board, which is really the rolling doubles one. It's the only one I can afford to do right now, which might be an option, but I have another option I really like in my ability cards, and it's this one right here. It's called Defensive Maneuvers. It states each of your stat dice gain +3 for defensive purposes this combat. These points cannot be used to modify your rolls, and it costs 2 agility to do this, and I'm paying for it right now. So my agility die is going to tick from a 3 down to a 1. So we're done the first step of the combat sequence, which is to choose if we want an ability in play, and I do have defensive maneuvers there now and paid for. The next thing we do is check to see if there's a warrior in the party, in the hero party, and there is. So there will be a might attack coming at us right now. And so what's going to happen is we're going to total up the number of might between the two characters in this party. You can see we have a 6 and we have a 1, so that's a total of 7. Now we need to determine what die they're going to be rolling together. So we are focusing specifically on a might attack, so we know the value total of the party is 7, but let's start at the very beginning to figure out what the hero stat value is for an attack die as a party. If the result of the stats combined is 1 through 4, you use a D4. If it's a 5 through 6, it's a D6. If it's 7 to 8, it's a D8. 9 to 10, D10. 11 to 12, D12. 13 plus is a D20. So when we have a value or might total in the party of 7, we are rolling a D8. So they have a D8 going up against my might, which is a total of 10. So there is no way they can actually get up to that level. Plus, my 10 is actually increased by 3 for defensive purposes. So I actually have 13. There's just no way their roll is going to hit me. But what could potentially hit me is the ability on the tile tying into a magic attack in the near future. Now, if there's a rogue in the party, the rogue would actually go ahead now and do an agility attack. They combine everything up and make that attack. Again, you can see what attacks should be made, not only by the types of characters, but looking at the actual stat type and seeing this specific icon resembled in a highlighted circle around it. So it lets you know there's going to be a might attack as well as a magic attack. You're simply doing them in order. So we don't have anyone doing an agility attack because we have no rogues. We can move right to that magic attack. And it states on the tile, add the hero's might stat total to their magic stat when they attack. So that's going to be pretty vicious. So as I mentioned, when they made their might attack earlier, I had a 10 in the might category and they were rolling a D8. There was no way they could hurt Troll of Bones. He's too strong because of his upgraded die. However, looking over here at the magic, I have a D8, and I can tell you right now, in combination of their might and their magic together, based on that tile being revealed, things are going to be pretty tense. So I got a magic attack coming at me with an 8, plus a 2 is 10, and then 7 for might added in as well because of this ability. So that's a total of 17, which means they're definitely rolling a D20 at me. I have on my magic stat an 8. That's the value that they have to beat in order to do damage to me, but I do have defensive maneuvers, which gives me a +3 onto that 8, so I have 11. So a little bit better, a little bit more of a help. Let's go ahead and roll and see how that defensive maneuvers helps me out. Oh, it was at a 7 and it just ticked over to the 17. That's a pretty good kick. It's also worth noting that not just that 17, which was above my magic stat, results in a hit. Also, if they land a true crit like a 20, that also results in a successful hit as well. And when I get hit by a magic attack, I can choose to lose either 1 health or 1 magic. And it would change if I was hit by an agility attack. It'd be 1 health or 1 agility. Or if it was might, it'd be 1 health or 1 might that I would lose. And I get that choice. So for me, in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and tick this down to 17. Let's go ahead and just drop it down like that. Now it's on to me. It's on to Troll of Bones. He gets to decide how he wants to make an attack. I can either attack by might, agility, or magic against the party. Now, totaling up the different types of attacks I could go after here, we got might would be 7, agility 7, and magic is 10. That is what I'd have to actually beat in order to make a hit. So a 7 rolling this D10, or a 7 rolling this D12, or we could be rolling a 10 rolling this D8. I think this one right here, I think agility is the one we want to use. All right, I got my D12 all ready to go, and I have to mention the fact I do have a die minion on my creature board, but I can't use it because I'm not rolling the same type of die as what I have this token for. It's a D6 that I have to use to actually use this die minion to help me out. So unfortunately, I have to roll this and hope to land 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12 as the result of an agility here between the two is 7, and I need to be higher than that 7 in order to make a hit. So the only other thing I can do to uptick that roll is again to change the stat value itself on my agility. So I could tick my 12 in agility on my stat bar down to tick this die up. So that's how you can mitigate these dice rolls. So, and of course I get nothing from the defensive maneuvers. Let's roll and see how it goes. A 10, look at that, I got exactly what I needed. So if you roll higher than the total matching their stat, you are successful and defeat one of the heroes of your choice. If the heroes are at different levels, the lowest level hero must be defeated first, and you just return the defeated card to the hero deck. So in this case, I have a choice between the two, and based on the tile, this tile ensures that it states add the hero's might stat to their magic stat when they attack. So basically the magic attack, as you saw, is the most dangerous. So I'm 100% going to take out the wizard so that on the next given round, the only attack coming at me is an attack I know can't even hit me. So I've really weakened the party. So Trollabones crushed that wizard and gets a victory point because of it immediately after defeating it. So we're going to take these die that are sitting on the side here. Again, don't worry that they're sitting at a pip of 1. It does not matter right now. It does matter when it goes to the opposite side. We're going to start keeping track of how many victory points we have, and I actually have 1 for taking out the wizard. Once I get up to 6 heroes down, then I actually match what's in this victory point track, and I can then flip this die to a 1, and I'll have 1 pip to use to add to a roll in the future, which is pretty awesome. Again, as you continue to rack up victory points, the next 6 will get me another 1. So this die will come over here, and once I get 6 again, this rotates up to here, then this one will become a 2, and it goes up until it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, as I mentioned earlier, and you can use these as you need to throughout your journey in the dungeon. That's the end of an entire combat sequence, and now we just loop the same process back over and over again until we have finished the battle. So as you can see right now, I still have defensive maneuvers on me, and I get to keep this ability right now, and I can pay for an additional one if I want to bring it in right now as well, but I'm not going to because I think I've got this in the bag. So we'll go ahead now with the attack from the fighter. It's going to be a 6, and we know when he rolls a d6, there is no way he can actually get through my defense for my might of 10. So there's no point in even rolling the die in this case. He just is not strong enough. Too weak at the beginning of the dungeon, but I guarantee you as we go further in, it's going to get a lot tougher. And as you saw, that magic attack against me was pretty insane right out of the gates from the tile alone. So now what we're going to do is actually make an attack against him. So I'm definitely going after him with magic. His magic's terrible. It's only a 2, and I've got a d8 to roll for my magic, and I just need a 3 or higher to take him down. Let's see how it goes. Oh, just barely able to do it. Good thing, because I didn't want to have to tick down my stat to hopefully get up and over, because I don't have any die minions on me that would have been able to help me, and that would have resulted in another combat round. But again, his actual attack would never get through me anyway, so I'm really just rolling against him until I take him down. He is just too weak. But I did take him out, and because of that, we now get to gain a victory point. So the die that's here with a single pip on the right-hand side tracking my 1 victory point now turns to 2 victory points. And again, in the future, if I get up to 6, I can put this die in the slot at a 1 pip and use that to uptick my rolls. And that completes the turn sequence and game flow for Die in the Dungeon. I hope this gives you a good idea as to how the game operates. The only thing we haven't seen is the epic party tiles. So let's talk about them real quick. So as Trollabones moves throughout the dungeon, taking out heroes, eventually he's going to come into contact with the epic party, which he can find with the Die in the Dungeon token. When he gets there, he can then flip over the tile in order to see what epic party he's got. In this case, I found the level 2 one. It states on it, the barbarian must be defeated before the other heroes. The purpose of the game is to defeat one or more of the epic party hero tiles, which we see right here in front of us, because they're trying to purge the dungeon of monsters, and we don't want that. The number of epic party tiles in a dungeon will vary dependent on what dungeon map you're playing or how difficult you wish to make the game in the build your own dungeon mode, which is quite an interesting mode to play as well. So this level 2 party is led by the barbarian at the very front, who's accompanied by a level 2 wizard and cleric. The paladin has to be defeated twice, which is the barbarian, allowing the full party to get in at least 2 attacks, making this hero party or epic party extremely tough. So you can see right here, it's very easy to know which characters are going to be pulled in, as it notes along the bottom, all 3 of them listed here, and you just lay them out as such, and you're going to go through the exact same combat sequence, aiming to take them down. And that's going to conclude this Kickstarter overview of Die in the Dungeon. I really hope this gives you a good idea as to how the game plays, how it's set up, and the specific mechanics that are unique to it. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.